All right, welcome everybody. I hope you're having a good Passover. Rabbi, take it away.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. It's nice to see you and a happy Passover. And glad you could be with us today. We're going to be talking about The Big Fix from 1978, not the documentary about oil companies, but about a Jewish private eye, right? And the question came up even before we started, why did I pick? And a few reasons. I mean, one is that, we're talking about the real Jewish Hall of Fame. So there's a variety of things that go into that. Couple of
Rabbi,
weeks we've looked. Yes.
your internet's not great. Can you
Let me try switching.
switch
Yeah,
your?
work.
I've learned, we say you learn from your students, and Nancy Frank usually says something, but I'm just jumping in.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, so why pick this movie? So I'll tell you, it starts, first of all, when I'm putting these programs together, I'm thinking about variety a little bit. So the last couple of weeks, we looked at a couple of movies that are really kind of exclusively Jewish, that take place entirely within a Jewish milieu and a Jewish community. And so I thought I'd balance that a little bit. And also, as I know some of you thought last week's movie was a little bit of a slog. So I thought that this one's a little more of an entertainment piece, let's say. So I'd like to try and balance those things out a little bit. But I also think that this represents a really interesting aspect of the Jewish experience on screen in America. And the movie that I've paired it with, No Way to Treat a Lady, I think when you see the two together, you'll get some of that sense. But there are sort of classic kinds of genres in motion pictures, and one of them is certainly the private eye movie, right? Going back to sort of the film noirs of the 1940s and Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe. And if this movie has an antecedent, it would be something like The Big Sleep, the Humphrey Bogart movie, with its kind of crazy plot twists and things like that. And frankly, I mean, people talk about The Big Sleep, and to this day, people talk about The Big Sleep and say, does that movie really make sense? It's really a good movie, but does the plot really hold together when you try and figure, well, how does this person know this about that? And this movie really reminds me of that in some ways. It's definitely a puzzle. So, but the interesting thing is that in the late 60s, No Way to Treat a Lady is one of the first, maybe. And throughout the 70s, we have these movies that are kind of genre movies that have Jewish characters in them. So they're just kind of twists on the genre. So this is a private eye movie. It's like a lot of other private eye movies in some way, a little bit of a fast talking, wisecracking, private eye. There's 1,000 of these movies, right? But there aren't many of them where that private eye is Jewish. Okay? When we look at No Way to Treat a Lady next week, it's a police procedural, essentially. And it stars George Segal playing a Jewish policeman. So again, there's a million of those kind of movies, about police solving a crime and things like that. But there aren't that many where the character is Jewish, right? And so it's interesting how these genre movies in the late 60s and through the 70s, and you can find examples even today, where a character kind of just, we twist that genre a little bit by adding a Jewish character to it. You might think of, I don't think we put it in this group of 8, but eventually we'll get to it, The Frisco Kid, a Western with, Gene Wilder as a rabbi in a Western, right?
I think it's one of the second to the last, or it's the second to the last. The last one is Keeping the Faith, and Frisco Kid is a favorite of mine, and I used to show it to kids, but and you'll see when you watch it, it came out before there were ratings.
Yeah. Well, before the ratings changed again, let's say, they got more prudish over time. the ratings. But so anyway, so I think that's sort of the bottom line for my choosing this movie and the one next week, is this interesting take on genre films by putting Jewish characters in them. So looking at this movie, let's talk a little bit about some of the folks that we run into, and we're running into some of them again, right? So Jeremy Kagan is the director. He's the same guy who 3 years later directs The Chosen, so which we just saw 2 weeks ago. And I mentioned about Jeremy Kagan then that his father was a rabbi, that he was raised in a traditional Jewish home in New York, and that he made certainly other movies that have some Jewish characters in them, particularly The Chosen, of course. But he also today is leading the directing program at USC Film School. So so he's a director and a teacher, and still around. A couple of his other movies before this, he made a movie called Heroes. It was Henry Winkler's kind of breakout from Happy Days, actually, and is a pretty good movie. He made a movie called The Journey of Natty Gann, which is well liked and actually won some awards and things like that. The writer is Roger L. Simon. We've seen his work before because he wrote the screenplay for Enemies: A Love Story, based on the Isaac Bashevis Singer book. So, and he wrote this screenplay based on his own novel. He actually has a series of novels about Moses Wine. The series ran for 30 years. I mean, it wasn't one of those where like every year there was a book, but every couple of years he came out with a Moses Wine mystery. So the movie was produced by its star, Richard Dreyfuss, who had just really become a big star this year, 1978. He was in Jaws in 1975. He then won the Oscar for The Goodbye Girl in the year that this movie was being made. So he became a pretty big deal in Hollywood in those days. Got, you know, even before Jaws, of course, he was in American Graffiti in 1973. So if you think about it, he worked with George Lucas before George Lucas made Star Wars. Then he made Jaws in 1975. He worked with Steven Spielberg before Spielberg made Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know, he does indeed identify as a Jew. He's he actually has roots that go, he believes he's a descendant of Alfred Dreyfus. Remember the Dreyfus affair back in France, right? And his, let's see, where do I have this? His parents were refugees from the well, I'm not sure when they came to America, from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So so maybe a little earlier than that. But so he's a first generation American born in 1947. So he's a baby boomer as well. And of course, you know, well known for a lot of roles, particularly in the 1970s. I mean, he was in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Other Jewish roles, I mean, he was the star of The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, which comes in between American Graffiti and Jaws, actually. So The Goodbye Girl, 1977, he wins the Oscar, and then he follows it up with this, The Big Fix. After this time, I mean, he had some issues. You know, he had some drug issues in his life, and you know, kind of took it on the chin in terms of stardom for a while, but has worked fairly steadily and has become you know, more well known these days as a character actor in other kinds of things. Some of the other folks in the movie look familiar. I mean, some of them become big stars after this. Others not so much, but you may recognize Susan Ansbach, who plays Lila Shea. So she was in Play It Again, Sam, with Woody Allen. She was in Five Easy Pieces with Jack Nicholson before this. So she is not Jewish herself, but she had one Jewish grandfather. The rest of her family is Irish Catholic background. And she sadly passed away in 2018. Bonnie Bedelia, who plays the ex-wife, you may recognize her as well. I mean, I think most people probably recognize her from the movie Die Hard. In that series, she plays Bruce Willis's ex-wife in Die Hard, but she also plays the first woman race car driver in a movie called Heart Like a Wheel, which I think she may have been nominated for an Oscar for that. And then, of course, a couple of people whose faces are very familiar. John Lithgow, of course, he was on his way at this point. He'd appeared in a Brian De Palma film called Obsession in 1976. But of course, he became much more famous after this. He got an Oscar nomination for the movie Terms of Endearment, and he got one for The World According to Garp. Well known to TV viewers as well. He won Emmys. I think he won Emmys for 2 different shows now. He won an Emmy for Third Rock from the Sun, and he had a memorable appearance on the TV series Dexter. If anybody watched that, he was a serial killer. And more recently, he's been playing Winston Churchill in The Crown and won an Emmy for that role as well. So very well-known character actor playing a part here in this movie. F. Murray Abraham shows up for rather briefly in the movie, but very good as Epis, right? He later, of course, wins an Oscar for his role in Amadeus. He's been an Emmy nominee for Homeland twice. He's actually of Syrian-Italian descent, F. Murray Abraham, which is interesting, born in 1939. And in a smaller part, you might have recognized the face of Fritz Weaver, who plays Oscar Procari Sr. in the movie. To a Jewish audience, he might be most familiar as Joseph Weiss in the Holocaust miniseries. But he, character actor, he lived from 1926 to 2016. So it's, hundreds of roles for Fritz Weaver over the years. So the only person so the director, of course, is Jewish. The writer, Roger Simon, is Jewish. Richard Dreyfuss is Jewish. The other actors, not so much. Some people mentioned even before we started today, catching a glimpse of Mandy Patinkin in this movie. Very small part, one of his very first credits. He appears as the pool man at Epis's house in wherever that is, Bel Air or somewhere, some ritzy neighborhood in LA. A very credible minute or two as a distinctly Californian pool boy, right, who cleans people's pools. So those are the actors and the writers. As I said, I think it's a great example of Jews and genre movies, and there are a lot. I mentioned a few when we started. Frisco Kid, No Way to Treat a Lady, which we'll see next week. But you could think also of something like The Godfather Part 2, if you remember seeing the character that Lee Strasberg plays, the Jewish mafioso, who looks very much like my father, actually, in his house on Miami Beach in his undershirt, he sits the way my father sat around the house in Miami Beach. I can't describe it more clearly than that. Or a movie like Marathon Man, which comes out around the same time in the 70s with Dustin Hoffman. So you have Jews in these movies, thrillers and Westerns. I guess we could throw Blazing Saddles in there too, although the Jews in Blazing Saddles are actually the Native Americans. If you remember that, Mel Brooks shows up there, and as a Yiddish-speaking Native American, right? Another one that I'm fond of is Roman Polanski's horror movie, The Fearless Vampire Killers, which is actually not the only movie about Jewish vampires, but there's that one, and there's also, I think it's called Love at First Bite with George Hamilton, where there are also Jewish vampires involved. Right? But the Fearless Vampire Killers, as I recall, there's a scene where someone takes out a cross, to ward off the vampire, and the leader of the clan says, "Hey, have you got the wrong vampire?" Right? So I'm these kind of genre movies with Jews thrust into them. So you have a character like a Sam Spade, right, in this movie, The Big Fix. Just like Sam Spade, he's smart, he's cynical, he doesn't compromise on ethics. He may come across as someone who might compromise on ethics, but when it comes down to it, he doesn't, right? The biggest difference between him and Sam Spade is that perhaps he's not as tough. Moses Wine is not as tough as Sam Spade, right? Sam Spade will take the guns off of somebody, and then give them back to his boss, right? That's not the sort of thing that this Jewish private eye does. So I think the name itself, Moses Wine, is interesting. I think you can make a couple of different things out of it. I mean, certainly the Moses, the wisdom and leadership and things like, we're supposed to see some strength in that name. I think the wine is supposed to be, it's spelled wine like the drink, but I think we're supposed to also hear wine like the complaint, so that there's a kind of a juxtaposition of strength and weakness, let's say, in the name itself, and the character, that he's playing is a baby boomer like himself, someone who went to school at Berkeley during the time of the Vietnam War, right, and had this strong commitment to social change. And here he is now living through an age of apathy. And you have to put yourself in that time frame a little bit, right? This is a movie that was made contemporaneously with the time it was talking about, 1978, right? We're just a couple of years post Watergate, we're at the time when people were talking about an American malaise, and that the people from the 1960s, the yippies and those who were fighting against the war had kind of lost some direction, for a time. So, and the character represented by F. Murray Abraham, Epis, is a great example. I think, most of the reviews kind of compared him to Abby Hoffman. I think in reality, he's kind of a combination of Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, because, both of them part of the Chicago 7. But you may or may not remember much about them, but Jerry Rubin changed his name and became a stockbroker in New York City. He was eventually killed accidentally, and he was hit by a car in Lower Manhattan. But he was like Epis in a certain sense, the ultimate sellout, right? He not only did he turn away from things he'd done in the 60s, he changed his name and became a part of the establishment in a big way, right? Making his money in the stock market, right? So I think Epis here in this movie, perhaps even worse, is an advertising executive, right? But a clear sense of having lost that sense of commitment. So, and so. That the movie traces a path, and again, think back to those old Humphrey Bogart movies where the character, whether it's Casablanca or the Maltese Falcon or something like that, starts out disillusioned, starts out, I'm doing this just for the money, yeah, I need a job, and becomes committed, right, over the time of the course of the film. And of course, the major plot point here, of course, is when Lila Shea shows up at his door and then is murdered, right? Um, so you see how much it does have an arc similar to a movie like Casablanca. Yeah, I mean, even to the point of having the old flame show up, kind of out of nowhere, right? Of all the places where Lila Shea could show up, she shows up in this place. Like, all we're missing is, is the piano player, is Sam, right? So, um, but they even have uh, you know, kind of a date day, right, where they go around and so there's music in the background and so forth. So um, there's some interesting things that are different. Typically a screen detective. I mean, it's the movie is just about the case. You don't really think that much about the detective's past or future, right? It's in the moment. But Moses Wine is different. I mean, he's kind of haunted by his past, kind of afraid of his future, um, which strikes me as a Jewish characteristic, right? I mean, that he's a Jew in that he recognizes his place in time. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, "The Judaism is a religion of time. God speaks through uh, events of history." So I think that this character is um, Jewish, even though he doesn't proclaim his Jewishness over and over in the movie, right? I mean, he's Jewish mostly in this movie by association. When we meet his, say, I think it's his grandmother, right? Is it his grandmother or his mother that he visits?
It's an aunt.
Aunt.
That's right. That's right.
A few times.
So the aunt who is, living in some kind of Jewish community home, which actually plays into the plot a couple of times in the movie. But also different from a Sam Spade. I mean, right? I mean, he's got his kids in tow half the time, right? It's he can't leave them with the aunt. He's got to bring the aunt with him too. So he's Sam Spade driving around with two little boys and an elderly aunt, right? I mean, it seems kind of Jewish to me somehow. Um, so eventually, he gets out of this. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much in terms of Passover, but he's Moses, right? Moses comes out of bondage and into freedom, right? So this Moses comes out of the bondage of inactivity. He goes through a desert of confusion and gets to a promised land of being a pretty good detective. So, um, in that name, that mixture in us of how do we lean on the Moses and not the wine part of this. So let's talk about the movie itself a little bit. The opening has a pretty jaunty score. What we see on the screen is the single lens half of binoculars, and eventually we'll see that he's looking through that lens. The music is by Bill Conti, who composed the theme for Rocky a couple of years before this. Right, and many other. I mean, he has way too many credits to list. So, so he wrote the music for this. It was one of like 5 or 6 scores he wrote that year alone. Actually, but so he wrote a pretty jaunty score, and so we see as the camera pulls back, we see that he's looking through a pair of binoculars. Hanging around with his kids and counting turkeys, and that this is his bread and butter as a private investigator, is this kind of small time kind of business, right? He says to someone's mostly mostly process serving and stuff like that. That's the kind of yes. He gets a ticket for a defective taillight and tells the policeman carefully that I've got a gun in the glove compartment. And the officer pulls out the gun. It has no, I'm not sure what the word for that is, no chamber. I think no revolving chamber, and a crayon in the end of it. And the guy says to him, "That's no way to treat a weapon." And he says, "I've got kids." You know, I'm again there's something that feels Jewish to me about this character, even though it's not expressly there, right? So so there's certainly some parody of things that were going on at the time. I mean, est becomes best in this. If you remember Eberhard's sensitivity training, I think it was, is in this movie, Bradley entirely scientific therapy, right? Best. So, but, and one of the ongoing jokes, of course, in the movie is how he broke his arm, right? Which I think is also just sort of an interesting, you don't see Sam Spade with a cast on his arm, right? So there's something about sort of the vulnerability of the character from this. But I don't know if I caught them all, but he broke it during karate exercise. He broke it in a bar fight with a butcher. He broke it because there was a black cop hassling a black kid in Compton and I was stupid. He broke it, what was there's at least one more. 4 border patrol guys were hassling a buddy of mine, right? So depending on where he is and who he's with, he has a different reason, which may or may not help him get some of the information that he needs, or some camaraderie or friendship from this. Also, perhaps unlike Sam Spade, I mean, Sam Spade essentially works alone, right? And Moses Wine is almost never alone. If he doesn't have his kids and his aunt with him, then he's got his ex-girlfriend with him. If Lila Shea isn't with him, then he's got the followers of the labor leader, right? The sort of the Cesar Chavez character, right? And who has disappeared, and they're looking for him. So so he's rarely ever alone, but and he's able to use those connections over the course of the movie to make sense out of this plot and get the answers he needs. And of course, unfortunately, and I think you really feel the death of Lila Shea in this movie. I mean, I think it's pretty powerful, right? First of all, the music is inappropriate, if you remember. So they're supposed to have a date, rekindling a connection that they had back at UC Berkeley. And as he pulls up at her bungalow, the music playing is not by Bill Conti. It's performed by Leon Redbone. It's called "I Want to Be Seduced," is the name of the song. So, and then when he gets inside, "All of Me" is playing. So so after that, while "All of Me" is playing, and he thinks he's there for a date, and he's carrying the bottle and the glasses, and he finds her dead on the sofa, and I think it really obviously changes him and changes this from a jaunt, just another case, just whatever, to this is the beginning of his awakening and coming back to find himself once again. So so mention the aunt at the Israel Levin Senior Center. She's worth talking about. I think it's a made up place. I didn't look up Israel Levin, but it's probably too common a name to actually be real. But she ends up with a debate, and she's in the car talking about Bakunin and Kropotkin, 2 old time anarchists from before the time of the Soviet Union. Really, Buchanan was 1814 to 1876. He believed in collectivist anarchism, and he makes a joke about just because you've dated every terrorist, and Peter Kropotkin is the other guy that she mentions. 1842 to 1921, he actually spent 41 years in exile in Tsarist Russia, but actually lived to the founding of the Soviet Union, and almost immediately began protesting the Soviet Union because he was an anarchist. The fact that the Soviet Union was a centralized government was against the teachings of both Bakunin and Kropotkin. And one of my favorite throwaway lines in the movie is when Moses Wine goes into the poker hall. He leaves the kids with his aunt, and she says, "Come, children, I'll read you a story about the Albanian Labor Party." So again, we have this sense we've watched a lot of movies, made by people who were blacklisted, movies about the blacklist. This is a story where we sort of see the kind of person that the House Un-American Activities Committee, went after, right? When she walks into that poker hall, the first thing she says is, "It's the rotten fruit of capitalistic society." Is what she sees there. So anyway, so those are some of the details that I like. I mean, I like the scene where he does finally catch up with the man he's been looking for, Howard Epps, which doesn't really help him get any closer to the case he's trying to solve. But to meet F. Murray Abraham's Howard Epps, where he talks about the trying to make ends meet after the 60s, and he's a delivery boy and stuff like that. He walks into an advertising agency and says, "I can write copy faster than any alcoholic on this floor." Right? And he does, and gets a job, and then they send him out to LA to head up their advertising in Los Angeles, right? So as it turns out, I mean, the plot really turns on the relationship between a father and a son, right? Between Oscar Percari and Oscar Percari Jr. And once we find out who Oscar Percari Jr. is, then all of the pieces kind of fall into place. Yeah. So all the mysteries are solved. And finally, the last mystery is solved. How did he actually break his arm? It was on his kid's skateboard, right? Trying to regain his lost youth, I guess, in some sense. So that's my take on it. I mean, I certainly have a lot of other notes about particular scenes, but I'm always curious, how did you guys find it? Did you enjoy it? What do you think?
I really liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. And the first thing I Googled was, why was he in a cast? And he had broken his arm beforehand, and they wrote it into the script. And I thought the way they wrote it into the script was very cute. Mm-hmm. And he also said in there somewhere, because it had just come out, "May the force be with you." Oh, yeah. I don't remember where he said that, but that's really a nod to that year. He had no idea that joke would age as well as it has. Nancy, did you want to say something?
Yes, I thought the humor in the first part, until Lila got killed, I thought I was really enjoying the movie. And then that was like so startling. And then it got really serious. And then I thought it ended on a real up note. Yeah. So yes, I enjoyed the movie too.
Right. Well, it gets serious until he runs into Epps, and they end up drinking and dancing around the pool, singing
yes,
songs from the 60s, right? I mean,
yeah, but then they got shot at.
Yeah. But what are they singing? Was it
Whoops. You got frozen.
"We shall not be moved," and they're dancing around the pool and drinking,
Yeah.
There's another song like that shows up at the end of the movie when he's playing with his kids. They ask him to sing something. He starts to sing the Internationale, right? The Arise, ye prisoners of starvation. He starts to sing, and the kids stop him, and he goes back to singing Animal Fair instead. Right? So.
I think they ask him to sing Yankee Doodle, and he sings the other. He goes back to that song that he sang to them earlier in the film.
Right. The animal.
Putting him to sleep.
Yeah, the line about Yankee Doodle, he says I can't sing your version of Yankee Doodle. It's too dirty.
Too dirty,
So,
right?
I don't know. I'm not sure what we want to make of that, actually.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, a very telling scene where, you know, when he's trying to track down Epis, and he goes into, is he at a TV station? I think he's watching video of Howard Epis somewhere on TV screens, and the camera pans back to him around from videos. He's watching scenes of Chicago in 1968 and crying, right? And it gives us a sense, again, a real sense of who he was, and that he's coming back into it. Right?
Arthur remembers seeing it as a kid. And he has a great memory, so he remembered everything about it. But I said, you know, they're trying to track down these people, and they're using phone books.
Right.
And, you know, I don't think, you know, certainly my granddaughter will not see a phone book. And there was all these other things, you know, when they're trying to look up addresses and where are they, and, you know, you can't Google and you can't go to the computer, and, you know, how to really try to be a private eye to, you know, track somebody down.
Now movies are being made that are set back in time so that they can have the suspense of not being able to look it up. Right. You know, so I mean, it's funny to see it, you know, in real time, in a sense, right? That this was the way to do an investigation. How else would you do it? You know? So.
Elaine, did you want to say something?
You know, I kind of felt like it was a little slow at the start, and then once Lila was murdered, it really picked up for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, so we have some stage setting, right? And when you introduce characters, I mean, sometimes it takes some time. You know, it's and frankly, it starts slow because that's his life at the beginning, right? You know, his life is counting turkeys. You know, it's hard to make that into a big dramatic thing, right? I mean, that was sort of the point, is that he wasn't really doing much, you know, until Lila Shea shows up on his doorstep, you know, and that changes some things. You know, I like, there's a lot of scenes I like. I mean, I like the scene when they go visit that couple in jail, the ones that talk about the California Four, and they turn on the radio and they're singing along to Why Do Fools Fall in Love, and trying to hide their conversation from presumably the FBI, which of course they aren't able to do at all, as we find out later in the movie when the FBI brings them into a hotel room to question him about it all. So there's a lot of lovely, interesting moments in it like that. Right? So anything else strike anybody?
Marilyn?
Yes, I really liked his role. I thought he played it so well. I thought the movie really fit his personality, and he fit the movie. I thought the way it was very static, he was very glib, and he was very, he didn't get flustered easily, and he tried to keep himself together. So I think he kept all the pieces together, the way he portrayed it. And then, of course, the chasing scene, we can't forget that scene, you know, that it builds up and then, like you say, it's quiet in the beginning, but then that chasing scene toward, you know, 3/4 of the way in really wakes you up. And the way he hides behind the bridge, and it's very suspenseful.
It is, and very clever. I mean, it's a well staged. I mean, it tells. So, we watched Jeremy Kagan's movie The Chosen a couple of weeks ago, and it's a very small palette, that movie, right? Chosen. I mean, nobody gets into a car in The Chosen, right? It's the
Right.
whole movie takes place within about 5 blocks, right? So it's interesting to watch him direct a different kind of movie, a movie in Los Angeles, where people are constantly in cars, right? And his beat up Volkswagen convertible that he's driving all over town. Stuff.
Yeah,
So I think that's really interesting to see 2 movies by the same guy and compare them. But that is and very clever, that moment where he turns the tables on the people who are chasing him.
yes, and I also felt that his kids played such an important role in the movie, and the fact that his own son had to tell him, you know, Dad, you really made it. You're really a great detective.
Yeah.
Because he really, it was funny when he was playing to strengthen his ability, was playing Clue. You know,
Yes.
that was so
Yeah.
funny. And then when he would have to think of a way to get himself out of trouble, he used his skills so brilliantly, like letting the car, the alarm go off, so he deterred them, putting his finger up his nose so she would turn back around. I mean, he had his tools in his own little kit, and he pulled them out right when we needed them, and it just carried the play beautifully, the movie beautifully.
That's right. And many of these things you can't imagine Sam Spade doing, right?
Right.
Humphrey Bogart, right? Humphrey Bogart sticking his finger up his nose to throw somebody off the trail.
Right. But
But
it took
when
his
you hear
son.
people say, oh, that makes sense, would probably.
Yeah, but it took his son to make him believe in himself.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really touching. That's when he flipped down with the board, went down the hill. He had he was so exhilarated, and just had to do that. He had to try it one more time.
Yeah. And of course, the movie, like those old, Humphrey Bogart movies, takes him through a variety of places, sort of high and low. I mean, he's in the country club with Oscar Percari. He's in the barrio with the farm workers, Luis Vasquez, and his followers. Right? It's an interesting slice of Los Angeles, I think, at this time period. So he goes to meet Mr. Percari and says, I picketed you 9 years ago at I think Lakeside Country Club is the name of it. Says, I picketed you 9 years ago, and Percari says, did it work? Says, you're still here, so but that he's there, and at the same time he's at a in the barrio earlier that day, trying to track down an address, and is sort of kidnapped and roughed up by the followers of Luis Vasquez. And this is when he finds out, of course, that Vasquez has disappeared. Lila Shea was killed. She was with Vasquez when she was killed, and so all those other things start to come into play as well, right? All the different pieces of the puzzle, and then you get to throw in that sort of new agey psychology movement too, with the best training that he gets to walk in on, which
and that the best training is from the ex-wife's boyfriend. Just adds another layer of what's happening in his personal life and how goofy as we're looking at it, because I think we're on his side, that the ex-wife hasn't made a good choice.
Right. And then when he gets to 5, he punches him.
Right. Yeah, most people only get 3 strikes, actually. Right?
Gave him a chance. Yeah.
So, what was the there's a line there that tickled me in that best trading, and I don't think I have it in my notes. Just the exercise that they're doing when he comes in. That's I can't remember now. So, no, I can't find it. But where he says, "May the force be with you," though, is when the police arrest him and bring him to the hotel to the FBI.
Right. Right.
Or he says, "May the force be with you."
It was interesting when his girlfriend was killed, he went back to see his wife. And of course, she was having a relationship with this boyfriend that she had, but whether he wanted to share with her his sadness.
Mhm.
And I'm not quite sure what he was thinking at that moment. Did he want to get back with her, or say he was sorry, or just tell her? I mean, it was left unsaid.
Yeah. And it partly tells us that, he's on his own, right? He looks in on his kids and sees them sleeping, and that's what he's got, right?
Right.
So. Well, so next week we're going to watch No Way to Treat a Lady. Stars George Segal, who you may have noticed George Segal passed away a few days before Passover.
Mhm.
Actually,
Right.
it's still Shiva for George Segal, actually. So
We'll be in Shloshim for him.
yeah.
And it's on Amazon Prime. I think you have to rent it for $3.99. Here is the link. So my suggestion is right now, press on that link and it'll come up in your browser, and then you can watch it at your leisure.
So I think like this movie, that's also a genre movie. Interestingly enough, we'll see Rod Steiger for the 3rd time in our series of movies, having seen him in The Pawnbroker and The Chosen, and now decidedly not playing a Jewish character in No Way to Treat a Lady, but George Segal does, and Eileen Heckert plays his mother. So it's another, I think, very entertaining movie. It's 10 years older than this one. It was made in 1968. So it's also got Lee Remick in it, who I actually just watched, just happened to be on Turner Classic Movies, Face in the Crowd, which is Lee Remick's screen debut. If you haven't seen A Face in the Crowd, it's definitely worth a look these days. It stars Andy Griffith, and it's directed by Ilya Kazan. And it's about a radio star who becomes a powerful political influence. Definitely has something to say in the present day. But yeah, there's some nice pictures of Lee Remick there. She was lovely. So she plays the love interest in No Way to Treat a Lady, as well as a witness to a crime. So I think you'll find that one interesting as well. And think about the relationship between generations here. We have it in this movie between Moses Wine and his aunt, right? That she may be a little behind the times in terms of her love for Bakunin, but nevertheless, she's passed on that kind of mantle of civil rights and human rights to her family. We can assume that perhaps his parents were similar, but that, so she's passed this on from generation to generation. You can think about that in next week's movie too. What gets passed from one generation to the next is a centerpiece of No Way to Treat a Lady, I think. So, so we're thinking about as you take a look at it. So if no one has anything else, we'll stop a few minutes early today.
I just
Yeah.
have one more thought.
Yeah.
Is it okay to share it?
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
Good time. I thought that the way the parents spoke in front of the children and interacted, and their life being thrown in the car, thrown from the beds, thrown from here, through there. It was interesting, to see how they were able to adjust. And it was very painful, some of the things that were said in front of them by the parents as they vocalized to each other as if the children weren't there. And that, I don't know, I mean, that's not something that the child psychologist would say is a great thing. They should have just sort of gone outside or found another way, but nevertheless,
Yeah, things we've learned since 1978, I think. on some-
yeah, possibly.
Although it shows that children are resilient, and those boys were very, very resilient. And when he calls after Richard Dreyfuss and says, "I'm not going to help you if you break the other arm," and that's like the end of the movie. And Nancy said it was, made it very hopeful. I have a couple of reminders. This Saturday is Yisker. So we have Torah study at 9:15, and then at 10:15, Yisker will start. It's the same link. I see some of our regular Shabbat morning minyan people on, and regular classes throughout the weekend and Saturday night. Rabbi, anything else?
Not that I can think of at the moment. So I hope by and large you enjoyed this one, and perhaps if you didn't get why I chose it before we started to talk, maybe by the end becomes a little more clear. And see what you think about No Way to Treat a Lady. I haven't seen that one in a long time. I'm watching it myself again this week. So but my memories are fond of it. So we'll see.
And as always, if you can't find it or you can't click on it now, just email me and I'll help you out. All right. Good to see
Thanks very
everybody.
much, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Bye.
Rabbi. Thanks, Vanessa.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Yes, thank you
Bye.
very much.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Mhm.
Bye, everybody.